The New York Times reports that the DA is considering pursuing criminal charges against the Trump organization, looking at that possibility. What are they looking at? What do they want to know?
Well, I think the first thing that they're going to look at, and the thing that they have looked at, is they look at what Michael Cohen pled to. So essentially in count 7, you have it laid out exactly, I'm sorry, count 8, you have it laid out exactly how the Trump organization paid Michael Cohen, how they classified those payments. You have Executive 1, you have Executive 2 in the Trump organization discussing how to essentially account for those payments to him. So at that point, that provides an easy entree to at least take a preliminary look at this and say, okay, is there something here where somebody did not do the right thing in their bookkeeping? Were these payments not correctly marked and put into the company's books? So that's something that they can look at preliminarily.
So why? So if somebody didn't do the right thing, obviously, if there are illegalities, that's the job of the DA. The DA looks at those things. But in the larger context, what could this mean, and could it go beyond those 2 officials?
So I think it's always possible once you start an investigation. You never know exactly where it's going to finish.
Well, we certainly have seen that with the Mueller investigation.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exhibit A, as they say in the courts. But I think the important thing to remember here is this. One, if anybody is charged with kind of the offenses that I just laid out to you, this bookkeeping, it's either a misdemeanor, or if it was for purposes of concealment, which it appears that it might be, it's a low-level felony. So we're not talking here about serious jail time. The second thing is that this is all in a preliminary stage. The state and local law enforcement partners have been talking to him over the past year and a half, ever since Robert Mueller, or a year and a couple months, ever since Robert Mueller was appointed to his position. They're not going to move until they're ready to move from a standpoint of on the federal end of things. So in other words, they don't want to get in front of Robert Mueller on this. They don't want to mess up a federal investigation, which he is obviously well underway and in the middle of. So I think any of these discussions are at a real preliminary phase. We've been hearing about for a year, this office is looking into the Trump organization. This office is looking into Paul Manafort, et cetera. And I think, we haven't seen a lot of movement on that front. It's not because investigators aren't doing their job. It's not because they don't want to do their job. They're just at a point where they've really had to sit on the brakes, so to speak, until they could get to a point where they say, okay, the federal end of this is done. Now we can approach things from the state side. Jeff
Jacobovitz, from a purely legal but then public interest standpoint, how do you see this fitting into the big picture?
Sure. Well, from a legal standpoint, the potential crimes here are fraud, tax evasion, and potentially conspiracy. And those are potentially felony crimes. And that's important because if you look at that in the context of also the Attorney General, the New York State Attorney General is investigating the Trump organization. These are crimes that are not pardonable. And if his family is involved or other individuals, 2 executives are involved, Trump cannot pardon them. They are working in context, presumably, with Mueller, and will not step on his investigation, but this is an outgrowth. And the fact that they're following up on the tax counts as well with Michael Cohen is a factor also. And in fact, in Virginia, they could follow up on tax counts on Manafort. So he talks about pardoning Manafort, but there could be state counts as well.
Yeah, the breadth of this is really extraordinary. I want to bring in Jeff Horwitz. He's a reporter for the Associated Press, and you broke this incredible story about David Pecker keeping documents in a safe. What do we know about exactly what was in there?
So we know that this was sort of where all the catch and kill documents were kept. So
not just on Donald Trump necessarily.
Yes, exactly. So not just on Donald Trump. Definitely there were things related to Trump and the Karen McDougal situation, but there were other things as well. And it's not clear that we know what all of those things are. The AP reported one to a former doorman at a Trump property who was paid, I believe, $35,000. We don't know what else there is in there. But it was, in addition to that, it was other celebrities as well, because part of the National Enquirer's longstanding business practice under David Pecker, per former reporters there, the publication would basically pay for dirt that it did not intend to use, and then let the people that it paid for the dirt on
know. Why would you pay for something? Why do you catch and kill? What do you get on the other side? And is it potentially information that you could use in, let's say, nefarious ways, that you could use against someone to get them to do what you want them to do?
What you're describing sounds sort of like blackmail, and that's a very big word that I'm probably not prepared to touch.
Which
but
I
what
studiously avoided, and yet.
But what I can say is that when the National Enquirer was able to go to a public figure and say, hey, we bought up sort of the worst skeleton in your closet. We have, witnesses and proof and people signed to a contract. Now, by the way, would you like to help us out in some fashion? Which they definitely did with people like Bill Cosby. That was a pretty compelling ask, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Zephyr, so David Pecker, we now know, is granted immunity. That's different from making a deal, just making a deal, right? Why is this significant?
Well, there's a lot we don't know. I mean, we know that there is exposure on Pecker's part. We know that the prosecutors think that he has something to offer, but we actually don't know all the details here. I mean, this whole week has been a big story about the growing web of serious corruption scandals, criminality with people very close to Donald Trump. But it also, as this week highlights, it also highlights the real importance of states, the DA, the New York State Attorney General's office. Our eyes have been so focused on Mueller. But having this firewall in the states and having these ongoing state
firewall in the sense of that is not something that can be pardoned by the president of the United States. Is that what you're referring to?
That's right. Now, there are double jeopardy rules in New York that limit to some degree the kind of state charges that can be brought, but they're not absolute. They don't apply to tax crimes. We know that Barbara Underwood in recent days was seeking the Attorney General of New York was seeking a referral from the Department of Taxation and Finance. That's a big deal. The New York State Attorney General has the authority to look into persistent illegality, not just in the foundation, but the Trump Organization, which is based in New York. I think what you're going to see in coming days is the growing role of states, state attorneys general, in particular the New York State Attorney General, in really resisting against this rampant illegality that's coming from the Trump administration.
Yeah, and Tom, you and I seem to talk about this at least a couple of times a week, which is that with everything that's been going on, there are still surprises. And, you start to hear vault and your mind goes back to a lot of different places. But lay out the relationship between the president and David Pecker, and in particular, leading up to the 2016 election.
Right. So what we know from the court documents that were filed this week in the Michael Cohen case, we know that American media was involved in working with Michael Cohen, and according to what Michael Cohen said, at the direction of the president, in order to pay Karen McDougal $150,000. And essentially what they would say there is they would ask for her life story specific to certain topics. Obviously, that would be one of them, the alleged affair, which the president has denied with Karen McDougal. And so they would offer her $150,000 for that story. And then, as you were discussing before, we get back to that idea of catch and kill. So in other words, hey, I've got that story. You can't talk about it to anybody else. And I'm keeping it. I'm keeping that story. You can have your 150, but that's it. And so I think, we know from count 7 of the criminal information that Michael Cohen pled guilty to that American media was involved in that. So that's one example of how this goes, but it is part of now a federal case.
Yeah, and Jeff, this is, probably it is less about the legality of it than just about the fascinating nature of it. But can we talk a little bit, Jeff Horwitz, as you investigated this story, about the safe itself? Was it kind of an open secret, were there just like a lot of rumors running around that this existed? Did everybody who worked there know there were these catch and kill stories? And I presume, you think about people putting jewelry in safes or other valuable things in safes, but in 2018, wouldn't there be that information somewhere else, whatever it is they were killing? Wouldn't it be on the original reporter's computer hard drive? Or I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around
Absolutely.
the whole safe idea in 2018.
So yeah, there were at least partial versions of these things elsewhere. That's how we found out about Dino Sajudin, the Trump doorman. That's how Joe Polazzolo at the Journal first came up with the Karen McDougal story and later the Stormy story. So there are other pieces of this elsewhere. Thing is, we don't know exactly how much stuff is there. And by the way, yes, the safe was known to, I would say, not everyone in the Enquirer, but it was a known thing within a lot of the staff. This was like an old school combination lock type vault. dating back, I don't know how many years. It was apparently a pretty old thing. But it's, and where those documents went, of course, we don't know. We don't know if they have been functionally turned over to the government. We don't know if they've been destroyed. We don't know if they've been moved somewhere else for safekeeping. Just that they're no longer where they used to be.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.